We all know that life can be miserable for long stretches of time, but then we reach a point where things change. We change our life for the better. We finally come out of the darkness, look back and say, "Oh, now I see. All those years of struggle and misery are now justified, because they have led me to this moment." From this new position, we can now look back at everything bad that happened to us and make it seem right. We can, for example, say, those were all steps, maybe even necessary steps, to reach this day, the day on which I'm happy. Today I'll talk about a thinker who applied this way of thinking not just to a life of an individual, as we might do with our own lives, but to human history in general, Immanuel Kant. More specifically, I want to talk about Kant's idea of man as being unsociably sociable, and how he uses this concept of unsocial sociability to justify the miserable history of the human species. Now, this sounds like a contradiction. Unsocial sociability. Kant talks about this idea in a text called Idea for a Universal History with a Cosmopolitan Purpose. And the text is about, well, why is human history miserable? When you look at our history, it's just one disaster after another. Basically, you have an almost uninterrupted chain of wars and destruction. Add to that inequality, injustice, violence and oppression, and you can easily come to the conclusion that maybe we should have never have evolved. But Kant thinks that he can explain why history is so terrible. Not only that, but he wants to argue that all those miserable steps were in fact meaningful. All those centuries of misery and struggle were in fact leading us to a moment where we can look back and say, "Oh, now it makes sense." And this is where Kant's concept of unsocial sociability enters into the picture. This concept explains why history is horrible, but it also tries to show how our future can be better. Unsocial sociability. Let's start with the social part. According to Kant, humans are social animals. They live together and form societies. Kant says, man has an inclination to associate with others because in society he feels himself to be more than man, as a more developed form of his natural capacities. Only by living with others do we develop our natural capacities. But what are they? By nature, we suck in comparison to animals. We don't have fur to keep us warm in winter. We don't have weapons such as claws or sharp teeth. We are not fast or agile as many animals are. In competition with them, and especially with the predators, we would get destroyed. But by nature, we have big brains. We have the ability to use reason and complex communication. We can create laws and morality. We can invent stuff. The thing is, you can't do this on your own. Only by interacting with others in society do we develop these capacities. They are present in the human animal and the human species in general, for example, just as they are in a newborn child. But the child will develop reasoning or learn human language only if they grow up in human society. If the gorillas adopted the human child, those capacities would remain undeveloped, or rather they would develop to the level of the gorillas. Now take human species in general. All individuals have these capacities at the beginning of history, in the state of nature, but they remain undeveloped, like the child's. And it is social life, social interaction, which acts as a catalyst for this development. So this is why Kant says man feels himself to be more than natural man, more than just an animal. In other words, a better version of himself, only when living with others. The natural human animal will take a stick and use it as a tool, for example. You, a simple ape, can use the stick to dig out some roots, like an orangutan would do. And in nature, that's it, you have a stick. Good for you. But in society, you take this stick, you make a tool out of it, but then someone else adds something to the stick, and another one adds something else. The stick becomes a shovel, so you can dig a lot. Then the next person figures out, let's plant a bunch of seeds in these holes we have dug out. And you discover agriculture. And then someone invents other tools, such as pikes or hammers, as well as new breeds of plant. And then you can feed more people, so now your society grows even bigger. Simply, cooperation leads to development. But not quite. Because Kant adds, this cooperation at the same time takes place unsocially. In other words, we are social, we cooperate, but we don't really want to. As Kant goes on, man also has a strong propensity to isolate himself from others, because he finds in himself at the same time the unsocial characteristic of wishing to have everything go according to his own wish. Thus he expects opposition on all sides because, in knowing himself, he knows that he, on his own part, is inclined to oppose others. So it's not that we actually like each other and this is why we are social. No, on the contrary, we are social against our own individual instincts. We cooperate, but this cooperation is driven by internal antagonisms and animosity. So basically, what Kant is saying, we are stuck working together. Just like in your job. Sure, we cooperate, but we hate doing it. So when someone turns a stick into a tool and the other person adds to it, the other person does so in opposition to the first one. Not because they want to contribute to the common good, but precisely the opposite, because they want to gain an advantage against the other, to have a more useful tool. According to Kant, without this drive to gain an advantage over the other, there would be no progress in history. Think of the ape from Kubrick's Space Odyssey. The famous scene shows an ape picking up a stick and using it. This scene symbolizes the first transition of the ape towards civilization and humanity. But what does the ape use the stick for? To beat the other ape to death, to gain an advantage over the other group of apes. And Kant says, thanks be to nature then for the incompatibility, for heartless competitive vanity, for the insatiable desire to possess and to rule. Without them, all the excellent natural capacities of humanity would forever sleep undeveloped. Unsocial sociability works not only between individuals within one society, but between societies within the human species in general. Competition, struggle, war, desire to possess, to rule, to subject others to our own will, act as the driving force of progress. So everything bad that comes out of the unsociable instincts, injustices and oppressions, violence and destruction, are actually means through which we become better versions of ourselves. And this is the point. Kant was an optimist. He believed that since war acts as the engine of progress in history, as society progresses, war will become abolished. As humans become more enlightened, more reasonable, more moral and civilized, they will also learn to become more sociable. They will learn to control their own unsociable, selfish instincts. As long as we are unsociable, Kant argues, we will have oppressions, despotism, punishments, and we will have war and misery. Why? Because our antisocial tendencies threaten to break society up. This is why we need harsh rulers, kings, emperors, who counteract our unsociability with cruel punishments. But as humanity develops and individuals learn to control themselves, in other words to put a check on their own antisocial tendencies, we'll have no need of kings or emperors anymore, and wars will give way to a peaceful humanity. Now, all this sounds lofty and hopeful. But in a short sentence, Kant adds, Rousseau was not far from wrong in preferring the state of savages, so long, that is, as the last stage to which the human race must climb is not attained. Kant is referring here to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a thinker who did not believe that humanity made progress. On the contrary, according to Rousseau, we should have remained in the state of nature, simple apes, living in the tranquility of animal existence and blissful ignorance. And Kant seems to agree. If that last stage of universal peace is not achieved, then all of history was for nothing. The arts, the discoveries, inventions, all those reasonings and tools cannot justify the competitive vanity, the desire to possess, to rule and dominate, which drive the production of all those good things. If we are never to reach a state of justice and peace, perhaps all those centuries of struggle, warfare, poverty and misery were for nothing. So what do you think? Do you believe that we have made progress since Kant in the direction of universal justice and peace? Or should we have, as Rousseau believed, remained animals, content with our instincts, never to develop our human talents, if only a few will profit from them? Or do you think that Kant's idea sounds a lot like that old mantra, progress needs sacrifice, and he just took this idea and applied it to history? Or do you think that Kant is right and we just have more work to do? More wars, more competition, more lust for possession and power, more sacrifice as means of further progress. Or perhaps Rousseau was right. Society is a mistake, has always been a mistake, and it will end no better than it started. A disaster. Let me know what you think. Comment below, and if you liked the video, well, click the like button and subscribe for more.